CIG made a mistake. They've been on a roll this year with narrative additions, launching events, and timed gameplay that emphasizes game activity, but leaves players feeling left out. But that's not where they made a mistake. The latest update, Alpha 4.1, is only the third time Star Citizen has gone the other way, and added a truly dynamic, player-triggered, open-world scenario to the game. The new Hathor locations see players working through a series of small missions to activate a mining laser, punch a hole through one of 2 moons, and loot the minerals underneath. A pretty cool idea on its own, but with the way they've launched it and advertised the update, players think it's the same as these fast-paced, narrative, active events that have been going on. But it's actually the opposite. This is not temporary. The Hathor locations, the associated mining laser, minerals, and sandworms, they're all permanent. This is just another addition to the sandbox that's meant to always persist, attracting players going about their normal gameplay for years to come. And when I talked to Void Dude about this on the podcast last week, he came away a lot more excited for what might be in store in the future of these locations. So let's talk about how these locations, Wicklow, and even the mining updates of 4.1 are delivering an experience that opposes things like contested zones and promotes the sandbox. Thank you for coming to my Tomato Talk. One of the biggest tugs of war in Star Citizen and other MMOs is what style of gameplay it offers. There's the theme park experience, in which you can visit different locations for packaged deliveries of specific types of gameplay. Then there's the sandbox, an open environment where players use the game's mechanics to interact with the world and each other in whatever ways they want. The global events CIG has been making are oriented towards that theme park style. Timed and static conflicts that do react to players but need to be interacted with in a very specific way. Contested zones are another example of the theme park. They are fairly open-ended, but look at them. Specifically FPS-focused locations protected by no-shoot zones, but meant to encourage gunfights with a specific beginning, middle, and end, and very clear objectives for you to shoot for. Yes, you have some freedom of movement and agency, but for the most part, these are pretty packaged experiences. But not every specific location or conflict is like this. In fact, the recent Supplier Die event was a great example of how theme park-like events can function in the sandbox, offering players a variety of ways to interact with the ongoing event. Players were able to buy, mine, or steal minerals in order to help their side in a faction war. And this has been a bit of a trend lately that has roots in some of the oldest locations in the game. Security Post Korea is the place to go to remove your crime stat in the Stanton system. There is a very specific function to the location, but there is no dictated time that you have to be there, or method of approach for success. Any player can trigger a mission for those in the area to come and defend that site, and other players can simply stumble upon people in need at that location, whether to fight or to rescue. In the future, your reputation will also probably do a lot more to determine your access to the space station and whether you're getting calls for help. But ultimately, it's a freely accessible location that factors into several game loops at any time and introduces both players, NPCs, and a little bit of base defense to shake up the situation. A true dynamic event. The Hathor locations are more like SPK than Siege of Orison. A lot more. And it continues the trend in 2025 of more focus on the sandbox. See, when you go to these new locations, you don't have to actually do anything. In fact, I've seen people salvaging, running medical support, and just exploring the locations. Each of those people got what they wanted out of the area and benefited from the hotspot nature of the location. Whenever I go to the location, I'm simply grabbing some good loot, finding a nice gun or two, shooting a few NPCs, and then getting out. When looking at something like Jumptown or Xenothreat, you kind of have to consider the timing. Did the event just trigger, or is it about to end? What time of month is it? Is it even running? Are the locations being used, or did I just show up after the event ended 2 days ago? You might also need to get a contract to gain access to the location, like in Siege of Orison or Blockade Runner. The reason to be there is to take part in the ongoing event. And while there is a central activity that players can take part in these new locations, it's not going anywhere. Everything added here is meant to stay here for players now, 6 months from now, and years in the future. And imagine being a player years in the future who's never played this game, getting sent out on some random FPS or scavenging mission or even a bounty hunting contract and happening across a place like this. Slowly uncovering what in the world is going on, finding the remnants of battles and ships, players and NPCs that had died and salvage that is able to be taken. Possibly finally doing the entire sequence of events yourself after figuring out what the heck it is. Any amount of interaction with locations like these is going to flesh out the experience of a multitude of players, especially if they aren't even there for the sole purpose of completing that series of events. And this already happens, by the way. The mercenary contract system links into these locations, sending players there to kill NPCs. There is, of course, plenty to be said about the design of these locations overall, though. They are still rather awkward for a large-scale game. They make obvious a pretty serious need for things to scale up. And there are definitely some other changes could be made that I won't get into detail here. But I do think these additions are going to slowly build out a much needed infrastructure of things to do in the verse and backgrounds to do them around. Locations like this are going to have a chance to lose their novelty over time and eventually fade into a catalog of unique scenarios that a player can trigger and benefit from in any number of ways throughout the Stanton system and across other systems in the game as they continue to add more locations, all the while just acting as a backdrop for whatever it is they happen to be there doing. And while the current iteration of this may open up a cave with specific resources that are limited to that cave, it can be updated to new resources, a new cave type, or even the full Valacar. There's no knowing what CIG is going to do with the space, but in my opinion, this is a pretty clear turn towards more sandbox-focused environments that allow for different types of encounters. Then there's Wicklow, essentially a scavenger hunt host. Wicklow seems like a flashbang addition a bit, once the novelty that he's an alien and the first thing in game to award more than just credits wears off, it's back to the same old things. But being able to award more than just credits is actually a pretty big deal for the development of this game. It's something players have wanted for a long time, and CIG's been telling us is for sure coming since around CitizenCon 2023. This is also an introduction to a new mission type though, collection missions. These can have you searching for a lot of things over time. Resources, items, fauna, even ships have been listed for delivery missions on the guild pages at CitizenCon. And this segment of contracts will undoubtedly expand into more of the Science Guild than what we're currently seeing so far from Wicklow and Rayari Incorporated. Collection missions are also sandbox missions though. Besides the current restrictions to the location of some of these current contracts, the whole point of these contracts is to allow players to acquire what's needed, no matter the method. This is something that lead mission designer Elliot Maltby actually mentioned last year in July during a Star Citizen Live was going to come to the game soon.
Open question is kind of alluding to is more resource gathering missions. So we will have missions where you are asked to just get 10 copion horns, or this refinery just wants X amount of raw iron, and the player can get them by their own means. For example, you could go mine it yourself. You could pirate it and use it for the mission and things like that. So in the future, we will have missions that allow you to get the commodities via your own means.
But this means stealing, buying, mining, scavenging, or earning as a reward somewhere else to get whatever it is you need to complete your contract. The inherent design behind these contracts is sandbox in nature, and they'll get easier to implement as we see more new locations, more assets, loot, and items created to populate the game. Considering the focus on playability, which does include content, I think we might be primed to see that over the next couple years. And Wicklow will not be the last. Just in the most recent monthly report, which we covered in the last video, the narrative team is working on 2 more faction representatives, or mission givers, for upcoming contracts, as well as some new dialogue for others. We know they've been working on mission givers and getting ready to get the old NPCs up to a more playable quality, so this is another good sign of that. And these very well might not be collection or sandbox focused in nature, but additional mission givers generally means contracts that are more involved, and that will encourage players to experiment a little as well. Finally, there are the mining changes of 4.1, as CIG finally blesses ground-based mining a little bit after all these years. These changes are pure content, not really any new features save for, I guess, the jump jets on the Geo. But most of this change is based around designing a clearer progression path in mining and allowing each type of mining to live on its own. With crafting on the horizon, the blueprints for various items are no doubt being created. As it becomes clear how much of a certain resource will be needed, such as iron, coal, or water, it makes sense to separate those from the commodities that may be higher quality, lower quantity, such as hadanite. If high-quality materials could also be mined with high-yield devices, aka spaceships, the much slower, lower-yield vehicle and FPS-based mining would die off. This is an artificial limitation on the game, but it does seem necessary for the profession, and this means there will be more reasons to specialize in each type of mining, allowing for more focus on the separate contracts and storylines that might accompany them. Along with this, we're seeing the implementation of a true starter mining ship. With huge trade-offs like a lack of interior, bespoke laser, and lower protections, this offers an accessible step into the mining profession, albeit likely in a safer, more beginner-friendly environment. Lowering the bar for entry to each profession will do a lot to encourage early players to stick around, as will making the more accessible FPS mining more interesting, and I imagine CIG recognized this. Then there's the Geo I mentioned, a linking together of two closely related mechanics, vehicle and FPS mining, along with the introduction of a new mechanic, jump jets, all on an already existing chassis. This thing is probably doing quite well for them. It'll be interesting to see how it balances against the rest of the mining vehicle lineup and FPS mining, but it definitely adds some variety and much needed mobility to the game loop. From making gameplay more accessible to players anywhere in the game to revitalizing the ground mining experience, and finally making very purposeful decisions with an eye on likely the most consequential feature set in the game, crafting, CIG has taken some much needed steps moving mining in the right direction and expanding the sandbox a little bit more in the industrial sector, but they can't slow down there. Over the next few months, I think we need to see more moves like this across the game, a sign that the gameplay teams as a whole have the sandbox in mind, as well as the more structured side of the game. With collection contracts, Wicklow, Rayari, the Hathor locations, and the Align and Mine event thing, 4.1 shows a focus on expanding the options for players outside of the typical combat editions. It's not actually an event though, and CIG made a mistake, I think, in how they marketed 4.1, managing to convince people that it is, and give people a sense of FOMO. That part, I don't think, was a mistake. All of this will remain and offer something for players to do for years, so don't worry if you can't make the most of these things right now. They aren't going anywhere. And have some faith that there are more players out there like yourself that would be willing to work together at these locations if there was just some communication. I know global chat kinda sucks right now and VoIP is hit or miss, but don't lose the faith that you can group up with people occasionally at these places to get a larger task done. And remember, as the main story, narrative events, contested zones, and global events continue to develop, we're seeing new outposts, abandoned locations, ruins, characters, contracts, and updates that are focused on giving the open world more to do. Fingers crossed this momentum continues throughout the year, and hopefully everybody can find something they like. Of course, none of this matters when the game doesn't run for you though. So while these additions are great for the long term, I realize many players want to see more stability improvements in the short term. While the game is getting better to play, it still has a lot of moments. Hopefully we hear more news about that soon, and when we do, I'll be sure to cover it here for you, as well as in depth over on Space Tomato 2. If you're into podcasts, that's where I host a different guest every week to talk about deeper development of Star Citizen and other space games, with many people you probably know from YouTube. That's the Launch Sequence podcast. I also host Citizen Central, which is a roundtable format we do once a month. Whether you decide to check those out or not, thank you for watching this till the end. I hope you learned something new, and I'll catch you in the next.